Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the continuation of the Gathering audiobook series. Where we last left off, we got all the characters transported to their new destination. And we also got a glimpse of the villain and his motivations for needing the stone. So while the mage is currently trapped at Castle Olympus, what about our heroes? How are they going to take me into this new world they find themselves in? Well, let's dive right into Chapter 6. Coughing up sand, Amanus woke up in a desert surrounded by dusty skeletons, jagged rock slabs, and towering dunes. He tried to get up, but his body was still in pain from the lightning strike. Falling back down, the Spartan removed his helmet and rubbed his aching head. As he looked up, he noticed the sky was entirely different. Instead of blue skies, they were red, and the sun was white instead of a bright yellow. At first, he believed he was in Tartarus, or even the underworld. Yet he soon realized that if he were in the underworld, he would have been met by the Taker of Souls who escorted him down to meet Hades. Sadly, he saw no one in sight. He was alone. Ignoring the pain, Amanus struggled to get to his feet. Grabbing his spear, he propped himself up. Only a few feet from him, his shield shined brightly in the sun. He looked all around him as far as the eye could see. Scanning his environment, he realized he wasn't in Plataea, let alone Greece, so where was he? "Hello! Can anyone hear me?" he screamed at the top of his lungs. His shouts echoed throughout the desert. Only the sounds of the wind blowing away the sand were all he could hear. He was a stranger in an unknown world, far from home, and he didn't know how he got here or how to return. Picking his helmet off the sand, he dusted it off before putting it back on. Using his spear, he slowly journeyed out of the desert to find shelter and a resting place. To his back, he heard the sound of an approaching sandstorm coming his way. Must find shelter soon. Even in pain, the young Spartan continued onward. His training forbade him from ever giving up. Slowly crossing the endless desert sea, Amanus continued his search. The burning winds blew at his skin, and the coarse sand rubbed against his feet. The sun's heat made his armor hot, and the Spartan grew tired by the second. Yet, he continued marching on. After hours, the young soldier found salvation, a small oasis shielded behind two stone slabs. Picking up the pace, Amanus threw his spear down, fell to his knees, and plunged his head into the fresh water. Gulping down, he quenched his thirst and rested his back against the stone slab that shielded him from the burning sands. He would make camp here for tonight, but he knew he had to press onward the next day. Removing his helmet, Amanus closed his eyes and slumbered off, whispering to himself, "I will survive this." The following day, Amanus filled his water pouch from the oasis and took inventory of what rations he had left. Only a few pieces of dried meat and stale bread remained. He would have to make them count if he wanted to survive any longer. Well, back to the sands, it seems. Gathering his supplies, he continued his trek through the desert. A few hours after he left the oasis, the Spartan saw the outline of something in the distance. He tried to determine what it was, but it was too far away. Running to a nearby dune, he climbed up for a better view. Once at the top, he got his first view of this new world. Just a few miles from him, he saw the vibrant green of the forest. Beyond that, he could see the grasslands and the mountains to the south. To the east, he saw an area covered in dead trees. Wherever he was, it had an eerie feeling of home. Just then, Amanus heard a familiar sound, one of thunder coming over the region. Looking at the clouds, a flash of blue lightning struck the valley floor. Its thunderous crackle caused him to lose his footing. Once the lightning stopped, Amanus began to wonder what was going on. Then he remembered what happened to him, how the lightning had struck Plataea and transported him to this world. Perhaps he was not the only one. Well, better get down there. Chapter 7. Decimus was thrown from his horse and landed on his back. Though the soil was soft, it did not cushion the impact. The horse steadied herself and looked for her rider. The old Roman groaned in pain as he moved onto his stomach and slowly eased himself up. Shaking his head, he looked up and whistled for his horse. Soon the horse heard the call and trotted back to her rider. Decimus rubbed the horse's belly, calming her down. Easy, girl. You're all right. It looks like we've escaped. Once the horse calmed down, Desmond tried to remember the last thing that had happened. All he remembered was fleeing the massacre at Cannae and riding into the forest. Looking around him, he believed he was still in Italy. However, one thing that puzzled him was the bright light. He remembered the burning sensation over his body, yet there were no indications of burn marks. Even his horse was unscathed. As for his person, his armor, helmet, sword, and saddle were all still with him, except for one thing. Looking at his belt, he noticed the missing pouch containing his letter to his wife. Worried, he retraced his steps and followed where the horse threw him. Desmond searched high and low, under dead logs and rocks, but the pouch and letter were nowhere to be found. Damn you! He beat his fist into the ground. A loud thud echoed around him. Hanging his head in defeat, he walked back to his horse. Grabbing the reins, together they went about finding a way out of the woods. I pray you and the boys are safe, Flavia. Decimus feared the worst. The young Republic was in danger, with the Carthaginians killing Rome's last line of defense. He could not save Rome, but he could protect his family. He decided to follow the sound of the waterway, hoping to figure out where he was, all the while making sure he himself was not being followed by one of Hannibal's Carthaginian scouts. As he walked through the forest, he felt an uneasy calmness. There was very little noise at all. The only sound he could make was the waterway not too far from him. Only a few yards away, he heard a slight rustle coming from the trees. Stopping in his tracks, he paused, gripping his sword. Trying to hear the sound again, the Roman cautiously continued his pathway to the waterway. If there was one thing Desmond hated above all else, it was the fear of the unknown. He already saw firsthand the consequences of being unaware of Cannae. He refused to repeat that mistake again. After a while, all began to seem normal, and Desmond finally arrived at the flowing river. Removing his helmet, he and the horse took turns replenishing themselves from the cool flowing water. Desmond took a few gulps and realized it was the sweetest water he had ever tasted. Removing his face from the river, Desmond saw a figure looking at him across the way. The being was in a mesh of bones and animal furs, from his head to mid-thigh. In its right hand was a club made from animal skulls and stones. Its eyes were piercing black, as if it had no soul. This was no barbarian he had ever encountered. Something did not feel right. He was not in Rome anymore. Heart pounding in his chest, Decimus slowly got up and touched his sword hilt. He wrapped his fingers around the weapon and prepared himself for a fight, but nothing happened. The figure stared at him like a shadow before returning into the forest. Releasing his grip, Desmond took a moment to center himself. He had never encountered one like this in all of his years of fighting barbarians. Not only was its appearance terrifying, but its presence alone was evil. He hoped never to see that being again. After a brief respite, he returned to his horse and continued down the river. After following the stream further down the woods, Decimus came across a small pond at the waterway's end. Getting off his horse, he looked around to ensure none of those creatures were there. Tying his horse to a nearby tree, the old Roman soldier finally removed his armor. Tossing them aside, he went about making his camp. Using his sword, he cut off several tree limbs and gathered several large sticks. Planting 4 rods in the ground in front and 2 below, he layered the tree limbs on each other until he made a wooden bed. Taking his saddlebags, he stuffed them full of leaves and soft grass and placed them on the foundation as pillows. With his bed made, he gathered more materials to complete his camp. By the end of the afternoon, he made a canopy, fire pit, spears, and sundial out of various stones, twigs, leaves, and branches. After a long day, the sun started to set, and Decimus was famished. He walked over to the pond and, with his glee, was teeming with fish and crustaceans. He plunged his head through the water and caught as many fish as possible. With his food piled behind him, he grabbed a handful full and took them to his fire pit. Before starting the fire, he took the moment to gut and descale his dinner. This reminded him of the time he took his children fishing for the first time, before Hannibal's invasion. Rome, 3 years ago. Decimus and his sons were at a secluded area of the woods near their villa. This spot was rumored to have some of the biggest fish. It was the same fishing hole that Decimus and his father went to as a young lad. Decimus' sons, Romulus and Justinian, walked through the forest and admired the colored leaves. It was autumn, and the time for harvesting was near. Their neighbors worked in their village fields, gathering grain for the young republic and her soldiers. As everyone spent their hours working, Decimus thought it was best to take a much-needed break. With their rods in hand, they continued to their secret fishing spot. Romulus was the first to find it and darted past his brother and father to see the fish. The old Roman chuckled at his sons. Picking a spot underneath a large oak tree, they sat down and cast their hooks in the pond. As they waited for the fish to bite, Decimus' sons began to ask him a barrage of questions. How long was he a soldier? Did he fight in many wars? How did he and their mother meet? Why did he join the army? And so much more. He tried to ease them, but his pole suddenly yanked into the pond. Decimus rushed to retrieve it, and as he scrambled to find it, he caught a large trout. Its tail swished back and forth, hitting the Roman in the face a few times. He tossed it to the ground, and his sons marveled at the beast their father had caught. He smiled at the scene and wished moments like this could last forever. Something broke Decimus from his daydream. It sounded like a twig snapping. Laying the fish down slowly, Decimus went to retrieve his sword. Suddenly, he felt the cool touch of a spearhead resting on his shoulder. His eyes glanced over and saw a figure behind him. "Who are you?" said the Roman. Emerging from the branches, Decimus got a good view of his would-be captor. A soldier encased in bronze. Chapter 8. "You're Greek," said Decimus. The Romans knew of the Greek city-states, but it would be many years before they faced them in battle. However, Decimus encountered several Greeks as a young soldier in the Republic's army. Decimus could tell from the soldier before him that he was a Spartan. His armor and weapons were a dead giveaway. What was a Spartan doing here? "What's your name?" "My name is Amminus. Amminus Baru." The young Spartan had managed to escape the desert and enter the forest. He still had his armor and shield, but unfortunately lost his helmet on the forest floor. "Who are you? And how'd you get here?" asked Amminus curiously. Decimus cleared his throat before explaining to the Spartan. His spear still pointed at him. "My name is Decimus Aquila, cavalry soldier of the Roman army. I was with my men facing Hannibal when I fled capture from them. I remember seeing a bright light that seemed to burn me, but I have no scars. Next thing I realized, my horse and I landed in this unknown forest without knowing why we're here." Amminus was intrigued. Could this Roman be one of the lights he saw in the desert? "This light you saw, was it a bluish color?" Amminus questioned. The Roman nodded. "I knew it." Amminus was not the only one who experienced this bizarre phenomenon. Still hesitant of the Roman, he took his spear off Decimus' shoulder and firmly planted beside him. "Are you hungry?" Decimus offered some of his food to the weary traveler. Though Spartans were trained to go without eating for many days, Amminus could not refuse the gesture. He removed his armor and shield and laid them beside Decimus' horse. The Spartan sat opposite the Roman, still wondering if he could trust him. Decimus had the same thought. Both soldiers were trained to be cautious around strangers, never letting them know too much. Yet, they also realized they were in a foreign land, and did not know what else was out here. They had to trust each other if they were to survive out here. They required a pact. The question was, who was going to make the first move? After gutting the fish, Decimus skewered it and cooked it over the fire. Decimus attended to his blade as the food cooked. He grabbed a stone from the river and sharpened both ends of his blade. All the while, Amminus stared into the fire. "Tell me, Roman, do you have a family where you're from?" the Spartan asked. Decimus paused and turned to face the soldier again. "I do. I have a wife and 2 sons." The last time I saw them was at our villa before I had to re-enlist in the army to face a Carthaginian barbarian. That was just yesterday, but now it feels like forever now. Aminius could sense the sadness in the Roman's voice. He reminded him of veteran soldiers who fought countless wars and longed to go home, only to be returned back on their shields. What about you? You seem a little young to be in the military. Though Sparta was no more than 18, his features misled others to believe he was much younger. Aminius will always have to explain this to others. I'm a lot older than I look. I just finished my military training before being sent into the army. Plataea would have been the first in my military career. Desmond stared at the Spartan in silent bewilderment. Plataea? Thought Desmond, that's nearly 200 years ago. How is this possible? You are old, said the Roman. Aminius glanced sideways as the Roman chuckled. The two were gradually beginning to get along. I fear I may never see my family again. I do not want to die alone in this place. Aminius pokes a stick into the fire. I can promise you this, Roman. Neither of us are dying here. We'll find a way to get back home with some help. For I believe we're not the only ones here. What do you mean? Desmond was puzzled by the statement. Aminius cleared his throat. Before I arrived at the forest, I found myself in the desert several miles away. As I approached the dune, I saw the entire region, and bolt of lightning striking parts of the valley. I believe there are other warriors scattered across from our world. Now Desmond was even more puzzled. Our world? If this was not their world, where were they then? He rubbed his forehead, trying to process everything the Spartan had told him. If what you say is true, and we're not in our world, why are we here then? And for what purpose? That was the one question not even Aminius could figure out. Smelling the fish fully cooked, the soldiers began to eat. Spartan gave Desmond his horse fresh grass and a few wild fruits and berries to snack on. I think we should stick together and find out what's going on, Desmond proposed. Aminius agreed. If either wanted to get back home, they would have to work together. They would leave the forest tomorrow and discover what other mysteries this land holds. Chapter 9. Early the following day, Desmond and Aminius spent a few hours gathering as many supplies as possible. While Spartan hunted for fish in the pond, the Roman went to the forest to find some plants. After acquiring enough supplies, they packed everything and tied it to Desmond's horse. With everything in order, the two soldiers slipped back into their armors and prepared to leave the forest. Walking through the forest, they passed waterfalls and rivers, admiring the beautiful scenery along the way. Aminius noticed that Desmond kept looking over his shoulder, even so often, as if looking for something. Or someone. What's got you so riled up this morning? A few days ago, I saw a creature watching me. It just stared at me across the river when I first arrived. When I gazed into its eyes, I felt cold, like all the feeling had been drained from my body. Since then, I've been cautious about these woods, wondering what else dwells here. The mere thought of the creature made him shudder as they both continued their journey. By midday, they reached the edge of the forest, where they found themselves in a new place. The Outlands. This was the region where life struggled to survive. It was once a lush extension of the woods, full of prosperity, but now it is a vast prairie full of dead grass and tiny trees. The soil was harsh and unsuitable for planting. It seemed impossible for life to live here. Well, this is quite the dramatic shift, exclaimed Aminius. Where do we go now? Scanning the surroundings, Desmond picked up a familiar smell. This smell meant many different things. Had a faint odor, yet he recognized that smell anywhere. Something was burning. A fire was near. We keep heading north, the Spartan said. Before Desmond could ask, the Spartan pointed straight ahead. Several yards away, black smoke rose. It looked to be half the day's journey from where they were. Either it's a bushfire or something else. Either way, we better investigate it. The duo then made the walk toward the black smoke. As they drew closer to it, they began to smell another stench, one more foul. The stench of burning flesh. Perhaps it was a campfire, they thought. Nearing a slight hill, Desmond dismounted from his horse, and the two made their way over. However, as they climbed a hill to get a better look. They were horrified by what they saw. It wasn't a campfire, nor a settlement. A massive pyre surrounded by soldiers resembling Greeks was a few yards away from them. Atop it were the bodies of men, women, and children, all charred and burned. Spartan covered his mouth in shock. He had never seen such brutality before. Decimus was also taken aback and covered his nose to the imposing stench. Below them they heard the faint discussions coming from the men. "What kind of monster could do this?" said Amminus. "Let's go find out." Decimus cautiously descended the hill, with Amminus following close behind. Making their way down the hill, they hid in the tall grass. Amminus raised his head to see how many there were. He counted 24 men. Amminus motioned Decimus to stay hidden. As Spartan slowly unsheathed his sword, he poked his head around again. Soldiers wearing armor similar to his were next to the pile of bodies. They did not look or sound Greek. Wherever they were, these men were rummaging through the belongings of the people they had just murdered. They snickered and laughed as they tore through people's belongings. This made Amminus' blood boil. But before he could do anything, Decimus pulled him back down into the tall grass just as he was about to attack. "What are you doing?" Amminus whispered harshly. Decimus motioned his hand to listen. Through the tall grass, they saw the arrival of a black horseman. It was Ares. Decimus' eyes widened at the sight of such a man. "Did you find the stone yet?" Ares got off his horse and walked towards one of the soldiers. "Not yet, sir. We scoured the forest for 3 days and found nothing. We then went to the village and rounded up the elders. They did not say a word, shoved their people into the fields, and here's the aftermath." Ares looked at the burning pile. Lord Kairos grows impatient. The mage has not said a word since his capture. Not to mention we haven't seen any of the champions of Earth yet. "Don't be so sure, Ares." Looking up, the war god saw Zeus, accompanied by his winged guards, the Valkyries. "My spies have discovered the location of the other Earthlings. 2 of them are not too far from here." Zeus threw Ares a map of another location. Looking at the map, a wicked smile crept up his face. "Excellent. I'll deal with them shortly." "Not yet, you won't." Ares glanced upwards at Zeus. Irritation grew in his eyes. "Excuse me? Why not?" "Lord Kairos requests your presence immediately. Send your men to find them." "What of the stone?" "That is your failure, not mine." As Zeus flew away, the war god grabbed a soldier by the neck. "Find them. Tear the whole damn valley if you must. Leave none alive. If you don't, you'll end up in the next pile of bodies. Am I understood?" The soldier gulped and quickly nodded. Ares dropped the man and mounted his horse. Before leaving, he gave one last order to the men. "Once you've completed your task, return to the village and kill them. We do not need another revolt from the populace." The soldier saluted, and Ares and his men rode back to Castle Olympus. Once he left, the soldier took the map and reiterated the order to the men. "All right, boys, you heard Lord Ares. We're going hunting. Half of us will find the humans. The other half will report back to the village and await further instructions." The soldiers yelled in excitement and retrieved their belongings. They formed into 2 groups. One group ran to the woods, the other to the village. Still in the tall grass, the 2 men looked at each other in bewilderment. "A stone? Kairos? What is all this supposed to mean?" Decimus lowered his hands to his side. "I'm not sure. What I do know is we need that map. We need to find the others before they do," said the Spartan. Slowly emerging from their cover, they waited until both groups were separated, crawling on their bellies like snakes. Amminus and Decimus stalked their unsuspecting soldiers. Unsheathing their blades, the pair quietly and silently killed the enemy without one uttering a single cry for help. The clash was quick and sudden. Ares' men did not have time to react as the humans cut them down. Removing his sword from one soldier's stomach, Decimus searched over the body to find the map. It was not on him. "Amminus, see if the others have the map with them." Sheathing his blade, the young soldier quickly rummaged through the other soldiers. A few minutes went by, and he was able to find the map. It was stained with blood, but still readable. "Decimus, I found it," said the Spartan. "Help me figure out where we are on this thing." As the duo began to look over the map, they were unaware that they were being watched. Over in the distance, 2 cloaked figures observed the humans. You have to warn the village, Richard. The stone will be found soon. Though usually cool and tempered, he was worried. His partner, Richard, clipped a note onto a falcon's leg and let it loose in the sky. He watched it fly away before replying. We have time, Mori, and they won't do anything unless otherwise. For now, we'll follow them from the forest. Hopefully Sparrow found one of them. And with that, viewers and listeners, we will stop here in the Gathering audiobook series. So now it's a little bit interesting. The introduction of Symbol and Tira, somewhere in the woods, as well as two other characters who have very human or earthling-like names. Who are these two? And who is Sparrow? Well, stay tuned for our next episode next Sunday. And be on the lookout for the next audiobook episode of Amanus, Son of Persia, coming out later today. Until next time, this has been the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out. And one last detail. If you're interested in reading the next book in the Tales from the Gathering series, I will link down below my Beta Reads application for my next book. As always, like and subscribe and comment down below, and I will see you all in the next episode.